Thank you very much, Dr. Casey, Sean, for your kind introduction and for your thoughtful leadership in matters of faith and diplomacy. And my thanks also to Charles Haynes and the Religious Freedom Center for hosting us here at the wonderful Newseum. I'm truly delighted to have a chance to participate in today's discussion because, as Sean mentioned, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between religion, morality, and U.S. foreign policy. Let me just say the reason that I'm able to have any kind of a consistent discussion on this is due to Bill Woodward, who has been my friend, mentor, and co-author, and we have spent a lot of time thinking about all this, Bill. Without you, none of this would be possible. Thank you very much. In some ways, I am the perfect person to take part in a conference such as this. I was raised a Catholic, married an Episcopalian, and found out at age 60 that I was Jewish. So I am one of those people for whom interfaith dialogue comes naturally. Yet I was also a part of a generation that was taught to keep God and religion as separate as possible from foreign policy, and I think this context is an important starting point for our conversation today. Like many people in this audience, I grew up with the Cold War, when our enemy was communism, better known as godless communism. In the 1950s and 1960s, much of our emphasis in the United States was on modernization, technology, and science. We were concerned with the space race, the arms race, computers, color television. To a large extent, the same was true overseas. The Arab nationalist movement, for example, was led by secular figures such as Nasser, who associated religion with backwardness. Experts in foreign policy theorized about the rational behavior of nations, about realism, and about world affairs as a chess match between one powerful group of people and another. We were living, after all, in modern times. We associated religious wars with the distant past, the Crusades, and the fight between Catholics and Protestants in the 17th century France. We saw places such as Northern Ireland and Kashmir as exceptions, lingering remnants of an earlier era, not as a sign of battles still to come. On the whole, we took too narrow a view. It's not that religion was forgotten as much as it was compartmentalized. It was personal, not public, local, not global. We were not naive, but neither did we accord religion as much weight as it deserved. Because if diplomacy is the art of persuading others to act as we would wish, effective foreign policy requires that we comprehend why others act as they do. We have to accept, even welcome, the fact that religion is a major factor in determining what motivates people. It's not enough to predict behavior based on material interests. People act out of faith, passion, and a sense of who they are and where they fit. We saw this in Iran in the late 1970s and in Poland and Afghanistan in the 1980s. With the end of the Cold War, and especially after 9/11, it became even more apparent that religion simply could not be kept out of foreign policy discussions, with conflicts from the Balkans to the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa having such important religious dimensions. This has sometimes been hard for Americans to accept because we believe so deeply in the separation of church and state. Yet even in this country, we have never separated religion from public life. And in today's world, a president and secretary of state, as we just heard, must take religion into account when they speak or act in world affairs. The question is how to do this without creating new problems. It's a challenge that a friend of mine has compared to brain surgery, necessary to do but disastrous if you slip up. A steady hand is needed, and so is a base of knowledge and expertise. When I was Secretary of State, I had an entire bureau of economists I could turn to, a cadre of experts on nonproliferation and arms control, whose technical jargon earned them a nickname, the priesthood. But with the notable exception of Ambassador Bob Seipel, I did not have similar expertise available for integrating knowledge of religion into our efforts at diplomacy. And we had no Muslims serving in senior positions, just a few mid-level jobs. To address these problems, we did take some steps to increase our outreach and links to communities of faith, particularly in the Islamic world. We reviewed everything from personnel recruitment and training to the listing of Islamic holidays alongside Jewish and Christian ones in our official calendar. We began a series of discussions with representatives of American Muslims, inviting them during Ramadan to the first iftar dinners hosted by a Secretary of State. And we developed an introductory guide to Islam to be available to persons traveling on behalf of the United States to countries that had a Muslim majority. Clearly, this was just the start, but I'm pleased to see that the State Department is really making progress under the leadership of Secretary Kerry to strengthen the capacity to understand and address religious matters, and I very much appreciated everything that he just explained to us. For the past year and a half, the Office of Religion and Global Affairs has acted as an important new focal point for these efforts, working in conjunction with the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. As the office activities ramp up, it will provide each of the regional bureaus with new expertise and guidance, and will serve as an important point of entry for religious communities globally. I salute you, Sean, for what your office has done and will do, and you definitely have your work cut out for you, because the integration of religion into foreign policy is still something we're all learning how to do. Many people remain ill at ease with this topic, and some far more comfortable dealing with secular figures than religious ones. We still indulge in stereotypes and make bad assumptions about what other people believe. In his guidance memo, has been discussed this week, Secretary Kerry instructed diplomats to engage with the religious actors and carefully assess religious dynamics wherever and whenever it's relevant to our foreign policy. His words are so important because they signal to the entire department that having an awareness and understanding of a country's religious dynamics is just as important as knowing its language, culture, and history. And this is true not only in dealing with the Muslim world. Religion is playing a growing role in China, and it might well turn out to be important in North Korea. The Russian Orthodox Church contributes to the sense of resurgent nationalism in that country, which can be good or bad, depending on how Russians choose to manifest their pride. The followers of different strains of Judaism have an impact on policies in Israel, especially under a political system where small parties can sometimes decide whether big coalitions remain in power. In Southeast Asia, religious persecution has been a problem in Myanmar, Burma, where, counterindicatively, majority Buddhists are targeting Muslims. During the Cold War, our greatest fear was that someone with his finger on the nuclear button would miscalculate and trigger what technocrats bloodlessly referred to as a nuclear exchange. Today, perhaps our worst nightmare is that religion will ignite fears and conflicts that we will be unable to contain. Nowhere is this risk greater than in the Middle East, where we are once again looking for answers on how to deal with the threat posed by extremists who, acting in the name of God, try to impose their will on others. Religious minorities, including Assyrian Christians and Yazidis, have been brutally targeted in Iraq and Syria. We've seen murderous anti-Semitic attacks in Paris and Copenhagen, but the vast majority of the extremist victims are Muslim men, women, and children. We know that the nature of these religious sectarian conflicts extends back to ancient times, but what is new is the extent of damage the violence can inflict. A religious war fought with swords, chainmail, catapults, and battering rams is one thing. A war fought with high explosives against civilian targets and broadcast across the internet for the entire world to see is quite another. It's easy to blame religion, or more precisely, what some people do in the name of religion, for all these troubles, but that really is far too simple. We know what a world plagued by religious strife looks like, but we do not know what it would be like to live in a world where religious faith is absent. We have, however, some kind of clues from Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and I would also argue the Nazis, who conjured up as soulless Christianity that denied and defamed Jewish roots of their faith. Religion is a powerful force whose impact depends entirely on what it inspires people to do. The challenge for policymakers is to harness the unifying potential of faith while containing its capacity to divide. That must be the ultimate goal and purpose of the efforts we're going to be discussing today. To succeed, we will need to learn how to talk about religion in ways that do not offend the people we're trying to reach. And that's not easy to do, and unfortunately, it's been getting harder because these issues have become politicized in this country. In my view, the president has been unfairly criticized for calling ISIS violent extremists as opposed to Islamic extremists. The truth is that these enemies of ours want the world to think they're Islamic and that they are a state, when in fact they are neither. They want to divide the world along religious lines, and they want Muslims to believe they're under attack by the West. We need to remember that the first rule in public life is to frame the choice. We will win if people believe that the great divide in the world is between those who believe it's okay to murder innocent people and those who think it's wrong, between terrorists and those who are not terrorists. We will be in for a very long struggle if people believe the choice is between the supporters and defenders of Islam. This is precisely the fight that ISIS or Daesh wants to have. But the truth is that when Muslims commit terrorist acts, they are not practicing their faith, they are betraying it. So I would close by recalling what Archbishop Tutu once said. Religion is like a knife. It may be used to slice bread or stab your neighbor in the back, but it cannot be ignored. Both the Bible and the Quran include enough rhetorical ammunition to start a war and enough moral uplift to engender permanent peace. The determining factor is less what the words say than the message we choose to hear. For all these reasons, faith-based diplomacy can be a useful tool of foreign policy, and at the same time, we all know that it cannot and should not replace traditional diplomacy. Often, the protagonists in political dramas are immune to or deeply suspicious of appeals made on religious or moral grounds. But if we don't expect miracles, little is lost in making that attempt. The resurgence of religious feeling will continue to influence world events. None of us, most of all American foreign policymakers, can afford to ignore this, and on balance, I believe we should welcome it, because religion at its best can reinforce the core values necessary for people from different cultures to live in some degree of harmony. We should always strive to make that very much the possibility. So thank you all again for being here today, and I now really look forward to our discussion.